Good day, gentlemen. This is SwashbucklingSir here, and today we take a peek at Hand of Fate, a mashup of a dungeon crawler, third-person brawler, and some smaller deck-building elements. The aesthetics of Hand of Fate are undoubtedly stellar. The high quality ranges from great sketches for every card to beautiful 3D graphics as soon as the brawling starts. Most notably here are the lighting and special effects that manage to bring the whole scenery to life. Especially the fight against the Queen of Dust did impress me with its flying sand everywhere. Hand of Fate makes it abundantly clear that the overall aesthetics are not meant to be overlooked, and it succeeds in creating a very appealing style overall. Almost the same could be said about the sound design of Hand of Fate. The Dungeon Master, for example, is exquisitely voice acted. The effects give precise feedback and underline every nook and cranny. Sadly, all of the event texts are not voice acted and have to be read, which is understandable in terms of budget for voice acting, however, sad due to the competent voice actor already in the game. Since the music is mainly meant to create an atmospheric background noise instead of carrying emotional story forward, it is competent in what it tries to achieve, however forgettable. All in all, the sound design of Hand of Fate is very good. Could however be improved in terms of the quantity of voice acting included. Let's delve into the rather unique gameplay mixture of Hand of Fate. For every story adventure you start, not taking the endless mode into account, you prepare 2 decks of cards. The deck on the left hand side is the equipment that can be found during your dungeon crawling. This consists not only of stronger weapons, but also of armor, helmets, gloves, rings, artifacts and trinkets. Ideally, you would want to include cards specifically against the certain type of enemy that you suspect to encounter. However, I mostly threw in new cards that I had not used before to keep the game experience fresh. On the right hand side of the decks, you can select the encounters that you want to possibly face during your adventure. Hereby, it is important that some encounters cannot be removed until you fulfill certain conditions. The same procedure holds true as previously. I mainly selected encounters that I did either not face before to keep experiencing new content, or that I did not manage to complete previously. As soon as you are satisfied with your decks, you start the story. Depending on the boss you plan to encounter at the end of the adventure, the card dealer adds some fixed cards into the mix indicated by their purple tint, and as soon as all the decks are shuffled, the game begins. The Dungeon Master begins by laying down the encounters face down in a randomly selected pattern. Now you strive to reveal the final boss and defeat said enemy to claim victory of this part of the story. Your character is indicated as a golden statue and you always move by 1 card either horizontally or vertically, hereby consuming 1 food, healing a bit and revealing the encounter you step on. One possible card is the choose your own adventure style encounters, whereby you select an option and more often than not, the final result is determined by your selection of 1 of 4 cards, ranging from huge success to huge failure, and thus affecting the outcome rather randomly. While the encounters themselves are fun at their core, I do see a problem in the random nature of selection, as there is no skill or learning involved from the player's side, and thus it fails to feel rewarding when selecting success, and at the same time also unreasonably punishing when you hit that huge failure card, especially when this ends up costing you your weapon just before facing the final boss. I would have preferred a system similar to how FTL manages random encounters, by which certain abilities or other pre-collected items can affect the outcome positively. Another possible encounter is one of the multiple combat scenarios. This is where the third-person brawling comes into play and the graphical fidelity turns up several notches. Depending on the encounter or just by random selection, you will be spawned into one of several arenas together with a bunch of enemies and possibly even traps. These short brawling segments are highly reminiscent of the Batman Arkham series without being as fluent and as responsive. Make no mistake, the brawling in itself is good, however the animations are not quite as top-notch as the basically perfect ones in the Arkham games. Also, at least in the first 3 hours, the combat is not as strategic and deep as the inspiration. Hand of Fate mainly relies on counter-attacking on green indicators, and dodging on red indicators, while there are only very few special moves or strategic approaches to the combat in itself. This problem obviously arises as the game relies on random generation, and thus you are always dependent to create enemies that could be faced with a basic equipment. While other story-driven games can later on throw enemies into your way that require you to use the latest acquire item or special move and the like. To summarize, the brawling is competent and refreshing, however does feel repetitive after a while. A perfect example for this is the spawning animation. While it is highly enjoyable for the first few times your character spawns and gets all of his equipment step by step, and lastly, your huge hammer falls from the sky just before you charge the flabbergasted and underpowered bandits. After a couple of hours game time though, I wish this animation could be skipped or disabled entirely, as it eats so much time. Especially when going from combat to combat to combat encounter, and thus this delay turns to be obnoxious rather quickly. Oh, and speaking of annoying, the camera cannot be rotated while in the combat arena, which can lead to some weird angles and fighting directions. Hopefully that will be fixed in the future. After defeating the final boss at the end of the adventure, or by dying in between due to combat or starvation, the tokens you collected along the way are opened and thus new cards are unlocked, keeping the encounters fresh and empowering your equipment for future approaches. With these new cards, you start the cycle over again, selecting a new boss, adapting your decks, and facing the latest random encounters you selected beforehand. All in all, Hand of Fate is a beautiful, very competent mixture of dungeon crawling, choose your own adventure, third-person brawling and deck building, with a few flaws in between. Nonetheless, Hand of Fate is one of the best Steam Early Access games I've ever played, and I'm very much looking forward to future improvements, which in my opinion should mainly target the repetitive combat, possibly granting you permanent special moves every few defeated bosses, and thus creating more depth and tactical approaches overall. As always, gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy my content, please do share my channel with your friends. Have a great day. Goodbye.